Imagine, if you will, a monster that leads a normal, happy life. It does a little eating, it does a little mating, and never having been researched by us monster hunters in its lifetime. So naturally, as it gets older and completed its responsibility to the world, it needs one final resting place, and that is what you see before you. What we have here is the Rotten Vale, where monsters come to die. Now, that may sound quite ominous and foreboding. You'll have to forgive my dramatic side. But in truth, this is the end of the road for many monsters, both small and large. Some of them are quite large as well. There are at least 2 different skeletons of the great elder dragon, Gallagher. This behemoth, no, not that one, is quite the legend for the older generations of monster hunters. The most distinct characteristic of this monster is easily its size. Being one of the largest creatures ever seen, the bones of these 2 corpses actually make up a significant portion of this zone's foundations. It can't be overstated just how massive these Gallaghers are, or were in this case, considering it only takes 2 of them to house an entire ecosystem with their bones alone. It's truly a shame that hunters of the New World haven't had an opportunity to research one of these creatures. But the Gallagher isn't the sole inhabitant of this living tomb. The Rotten Vale is filled with the remains of thousands, tens of thousands of monsters, and they have really made a mess of the place. For every zone, I always encourage hunters to slow down and enjoy the scenery from time to time. But you'd be forgiven if you didn't spend much time here, because much of the scenery is just rotting bodies and entrails. Most of the creatures are beyond recognition at this point, but the savvy hunters may have noticed 2 familiar faces in Area 6. A Rathian and a Diablos. Being that they are so close together and appear to have died particularly violently, it would appear that they were engaged in heated combat with one another before their bout ended in a draw, with both of them resting now in the Vale, and providing a generous meal for some of the local inhabitants. Speaking of local inhabitants, the Rotten Vale is teeming with life that thrives off the remains of monsters that litter the area. Many are creatures seen in other areas that are drawn here by the abundance of basically free food, such as the mosswine and the raffinos, but there are a few animals that are unique to the Vale exclusively. These little puppies are the gyros. Actually, puppy is a bit inaccurate. They are more like 4-legged snakes than anything else, and they have the paralyzing neurotoxin to prove it. The gyros hunt in packs and are rarely found alone. They'll attack almost anything on sight, except the great gyros, which is the pack leader and the subject of our next episode. Stay tuned. Since they are so aggressive, hunters may find them of use while conducting their research, because the gyros will actually ambush the larger monsters that hunters have stunned, assuming they weren't all slaughtered during the endeavor. Just like the Jagras, they are basically massive cowards on their own, so the death of just one of them is enough to scatter the survivors. Next up, we have the Hornitors. These giant crickets have been around for many hunter generations, and they have two main traits that have defined them for years. Being very pestering to hunters out in the field, and having resources for the smithy that are particularly annoying to acquire. They have extremely weak exteriors, so in order to gather their resources, hunters are advised to use the slinger or clutch claw, because attacking them with primary weaponry will cause them to disintegrate entirely. Now, you may have noticed a trend when discussing the creatures of the Rotten Vale, that many of the locals are quite unfriendly to visitors. This is most likely due to the toxic environment of the zone itself. Hostile living conditions can lead to hostile tendencies, at least according to the neurologist that I met with recently. This toxic gas is called effluvium. It's produced by bacteria that speeds up the breaking down of biowaste caused by all the piles of corpses. And this is the primary function of the Rotten Vale. The reasoning behind why all of these creatures are compelled to end their journeys here is something still undergoing research. At the moment, it is believed to simply be instinctual, mental instructions passed down from parent to offspring. But what happens to the bodies of these monsters is something we at least know a little about. They are dissolved by the effluvium into bioenergy. This bioenergy flows into the Everstream, which then transports it through massive caverns running underneath and connected to every zone in some way, allowing it to function as the lifeblood of the New World and its ecosystems. So in essence, some monsters feed off the land, and other monsters feed off of them, but in the end they are all returned to the New World through the Rotten Vale eventually, forming a quite poetic cycle of life from this process. Everything must have its end, or there is no beginning. Death is not the opposite of life, but the counterpart to birth. Death is beautiful because it represents change. The Rotten Vale may not have pretty scenery. It may not have a nice appeal, at least by the traditional definitions of those terms. But what it does have, more so than every other zone in the New World, what it has is a purpose. And that purpose is beautiful. I have been your host, Kanadi96, and this has been the Ecological Delve. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, tell all your friends, and stay tuned for the next episode.